Good morning, everyone. Um, First of all, thank you for the opportunity, Jenna, and for having me back at Transform this year. Um, I'd just like to start my talk by saying that those who are transgender are not a monolithic population, right? Um, and hence people from this community have different needs. They experience um, barriers in many ways, and their levels of access to healthcare are hence very different, right? So what I'm going to speak about today is specifically on the challenges faced by trans masculine people, um, which restricts them from exercising their sexual and reproductive rights, right? So many of us are aware that a major criticism of the Transgender Act is that although it states the right to our self-perceived identity, it still mandates some form of medical intervention for us to be legally recognized as man or woman, right? Now, it is crucial to note that the set of rules that came later, Rule 6 specifically mentions that uses the term medical intervention to include all sorts of gender affirming or any gender affirming medical intervention, which includes, which an individual undertakes to facilitate their transition to their self-identified gender, which includes but is not limited to counseling, hormone therapy, and surgical intervention, if any, right? Now, what the Act has done is it has broadened the ambit of this provision. However, even today, we face challenges because the government officials who are involved in this process often ask for proof of surgery in order to legally recognize us as man and woman, and don't really understand what gender affirming medical intervention involves, right? Because for everyone, sex and gender are the same, which means if you're a man, you need to have a penis, right? Now, I want all of us to think about the implications of this when it comes to the sexual and reproductive capacities of a trans masculine person, right? This means that although both the right to gender identity and the right to sexual and reproductive health care are basic human rights, for a lot of trans masculine people, we can't have both at the same time, right? We have to choose between one or the other. Now, in 2018, when I took part in Transform, I spoke of the many challenges that I faced when I dealt with government officials in Kerala, where I'm from, to change my gender markers on my legal identification documents, right? So it was a year after the launch of the Kerala transgender policy, a core essence of which highlighted the right to self-identification, right? Which means that any person can legally identify as a man, woman, or transgender, and does not need any medical intervention, and does not need to show any proof of surgery to change our identification markers, right? Now, I went through a 6-month ordeal, which involved a lot of physical and mental harassment from the state to change my gender markers. I was made to strip at multiple hospitals, show my bare body. I was put through invasive ultrasound scans at multiple times to produce medical board certificates from government hospitals to prove my gender. Right now, I'm someone who loves kids, and I would have loved to have the option of have a child of my own. But at that point, I didn't know this was an option for me. Who wanted to live my truth openly, for me, who wanted some relief in some shape or form from the dysphoria that I constantly felt every day, I didn't know this was an option. And this is still today not an option for a lot of transmasculine persons, for where our legal recognition of our gender identity is still tied into hormonal and surgical compromises, either by law or by government officials whose mercy we are at, and often require proof of surgery for us to be legally recognized, right? Now, even if, for example, transmasculine persons did not need to give up their legal recognition for their, did not need to give up on their sexual or reproductive capacities to be legally recognized as man, there are still many, many obstacles which restrict us from exercising these rights, right? Uh, for a beginning, the Indian healthcare system is not gender inclusive, right? Gendered healthcare spaces and individual providers are ill-equipped to deal with the requirements of or the healthcare, unique healthcare needs of transmasculine persons. Um, Now, this is a fact that our healthcare system or the reproductive healthcare system is historically centered around cisgender women, right? And this is a result, I would say this is a result of cis-normative societal structures that reinforce, binary reproductive norms as an expectation, right? For instance, men don't have a uterus, hence men cannot get pregnant, hence men should not even desire to get pregnant, right? And now this translates into psychological concerns as well, right? For many transmasculine persons, the need to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be addressed as a man, and hence with the consistent usage of our chosen name and pronouns, is crucial for our emotional well-being and safety. So so for many trans masculine persons, even if they were to go the route of having their own child, they would not want it to be broadly known, right? Broadly known by others. They would rather just want to keep that news to their closest loved ones and their medical providers, which in its current scenario in a country like India would be nearly impossible. I think it would be the cover page story of all the newspapers should Aksa did mention that, they didn't know if there was a trans man who's had their child in India, right? Now, I'd like to substantiate some of these things with experiences, right? I've read an interview of a trans man, and this is an interview of someone from abroad, who went through the process of giving birth to their own child. And the biggest thing that they mentioned was that I was petrified through the entire process, that I chose not to leave my home for the biggest time because I was petrified that I would be perceived and read as a pregnant female, right? And the biggest struggle in my life was to be acknowledged and have people treat me as a man, call me as a man, and address me as a man. And I didn't want to give that up just by, being perceived as a pregnant female. So this person chose as much as possible to stay within their home during the entire duration of their pregnancy. Now, I'd like to share my own experience. I did mention earlier that I was put through invasive ultrasound scans as part of the process of kind of proving my gender, right? Now, this was my experience. I feel a little dysphoric sharing this itself, but I'll try to paint a simple picture for you. When I went to one of the government hospitals to get this process done, right? So just imagine a heavily bearded man walking into the ultrasound room, and there are 10 to 15 pregnant women sitting outside, wondering, they're all very uncomfortable, rightly so, and they're waiting for their turn and annoyed. And then they see this man walking in and they understand he's not a doctor because he's been escorted by nurses who are giggling, and immediately people want to know why, what happened, and why he gets to go in before us. And the nurses, obviously, with no respect to my privacy, go and mutter something. And then these women started giggling, they started clicking my pictures, they start laughing, and they're very, very curious to know what are they gonna find, right, in me. And I go into the room, and I don't know if anyone might be some of you have gone through ultrasound scans. Ideally, might be a doctor or maximum 1 or 2 nurses who are in the room who do this procedure. For my procedure, there were 10 medical students who didn't need to be there. There were some junior doctors. There were many nurses who had no business being there, and they were all there just to watch a show, right? I was treated as an object of ridicule, object of amusement. And I don't know what a procedure that should have ideally taken 5 to 10 minutes at max took 20, 25 minutes. I don't know what they were trying to find. And I felt that my personhood died. I was not a person anymore, right? I was extremely uncomfortable, and the time that I was lying on that bed, I thought of many ways that I wanted to end my life, right? I wanted to run out of the room. I was looking, I looked whether there was a window in the room that I could jump out of, right? And So this, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, right? This is just my experience, and this is the experience of a lot of transmasculine people, and might be even worse. Uh, there's also a trans man in India who delayed their transition a lot, their medical transition a lot, because they wanted to have a child of their own, right? And they're a close friend of mine. And he was put through an excruciating ordeal by the IVF clinic, who asked him the most intrusive and inappropriate questions because he presented as a man. Yeah, his gender expression was masculine, right? And they didn't have any business asking those questions as well. And for him, the entire ordeal was so dysphoric because there was no avenue for him to state his chosen name and pronouns. Because everything, our information systems, your forms, everything is built towards cisgender women when it comes to pregnancy, right? Now, he got so dysphoric that he decided to give up his dream of becoming a parent just because of the system and the behavior of people as part of it, right? Now, his suffering is a result of the institutional structures that cannot recognize the possibility that a transgender man can become pregnant, right? And this sets so many restrictions on transmasculine persons' reproductive choices, right? Now, firstly, there is a big lapse, in the hospital, in the information systems in our hospitals, and often the very few trans-friendly hospitals in India even, do not account for a man needing services that are traditionally ascribed to female patients, right? So if a man wants prenatal or postpartum care, if a man needs gynecological services, they often face so many challenges to even book these services, let alone bill these services, because of how the systems are managed and the lack of awareness of the people in the system. Now, insurance service providers is a whole challenge altogether, right? Because obviously insurance service providers see everything in black and white. It's all man, woman, and no one can look at these services in the gray, right? That's a whole challenge altogether. Secondly, an issue is again the information systems lack the capacity to differentiate between the legal name and a chosen name of a patient, right? And hence it becomes extremely difficult and a very dysphoric experience to go to a hospital and seek services when your pronouns are not respected and your chosen name is not respected, because everything goes by your legal ID cards, right? Your Aadhaar and all of that. And a lot of trans people and gender non-binary people do not have adequate ID cards. Now, lastly, it is close to impossible to list yourself as a father on the birth certificate of your child, right? Even if that is your parental identity. Right now, these are just some of the many challenges that transmasculine people face, which I would say restricts them, or which is one of the reasons that they avoid seeking healthcare services, especially sexual and reproductive healthcare, right? The fear of stigma, the fear of being misgendered, the fear of being mistreated is just many reasons why a lot of transmasculine people don't even explore this way. Now, Aksa did mention that they're not aware if there is a trans man who has given birth. There are many trans men in India who have children, because these are trans men who have entered in marital relationships with cisgender men, right? And have children as a result of that, right? Whether with or without their consent. Now, when these relationships go sour, right? When these trans men decide to come out and live their life authentically, they are often forced to give up the custody of their child, for whom until then they were the primary caregiver, right? And we've seen that the courts, due to their inherent bias towards trans people, often quote the well-being of the child and favor the cisgender partners of these trans men. There have also been instances where the courts also force the trans people to lose their visitation rights to their children, quoting that it would be traumatizing for their children to view their transmasculine parents post their social and medical transition, right? Now, this is the current scenario. This is the current status in India. And again, I'm not going to repeat, but all the laws, whether it is the abortion law, whether it is the art bill, and the surrogacy bill, which just got passed, I understand, by the Rajya Sabha, none of this includes or addresses transmasculine rights, and I think the broader LGBT community as well now. So, yeah, I'd like to conclude my talk with that, and I'm happy to take any questions.